Today, I am sitting across someone who went from working on a farm as a young boy to becoming the president and CEO of Reebok, HBO, Indian Motorcycle, Skybox International, and other many iconic brands. He is none other than Frank O'Connell. Frank was the president of Reebok Brands, president of HBO Video, CEO of Indian Motorcycle, and chairman and CEO of Gibson Greetings Inc. He is also the author of the new book, Jump First, Think Fast, an unconventional approach to high performance. Frank has a passion for mentoring amongst many other things. And he joins us today on the Payal Nanjiani Leadership Podcast to talk about the essence of innovation. Frank, welcome to the Payal Nanjiani Leadership Podcast. It is such an honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and I believe you were on the cruise for this long. How was your experience?
Well, it was wonderful. We love cruising. The weather was beautiful. But then, the interesting part is always the people. I'm always fascinated by the people. And of course, during that time, I ended up meeting the captain. The captain got intrigued with my book. My book ended up in the library on the ship, and people started reading it, and that set up a whole other dialogue, which was really a lot of fun.
I did see that on the LinkedIn very recently, and that's when it reminded me of a cruise experience that I had when we were cruising to Mexico. But I think like with you, Frank, you've got more than 50 years of experience now. And I know I have barely read anything about you. So how about we dig deep into just how did you get started, and what are some of your experiences, your setbacks, your challenges that have helped you to grow in your career?
Okay. I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. And my mother was a city girl. She married my father, who was a farmer, even though he was a Notre Dame graduate. But he died when I was 2.5. And my mother decided to stay on the farm to raise my brother, who was a year older, and myself. She thought it was going to be a good, stable environment. So from about the time we were able to walk, we were outside working with the hired men and learned the value of hard work. And so at early ages, my mother encouraged us. We started raising animals. We had eventually 300 laying hens, 3,000 chickens, broilers, and then we started buying machinery and crops and my negotiating to buy fertilizer. My mother was fantastic. She was a great businesswoman, but she encouraged us and taught us the value of really hard work. She used to have a great saying. She said, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Absolutely. I so believe in that. I so believe in that.
And then, of course, what happened was, I went into the 4-H, and became the president of the 4-H and the FFA, and I learned all sorts of things about organizational skills and other things. And then, of course, I ended up going to Cornell, that was to the College of Agriculture, which was tuition free if you were on a farm in New York State. And then I double registered and went to the business school. And from there, of course, I got involved. Everybody said, well, the people are making money in food are those middlemen, not the farmers. So I said, well, maybe I ought to be one of those. So I went to work for, a big food company in LA. It's called Carnation Company. It eventually bought by Nestle, a phenomenal training ground. I was in an accelerated training program, worked in every aspect of the business. And there I learned that I had a skill for marketing, in particular for creativity and product development. So that was a major factor that set me on my way. Now, you asked me about, my other experiences, including failures. And, I kid, I say, the book would be a lot smaller if I didn't write about my failures. So And I don't know, it's interesting. I don't look at them so much as failures as setbacks or, part of, just experience. So maybe there are a couple that stand out in the book. So I went to Reebok
Mhm.
and was brought in by the board really because Paul Fireman, the chairman, had had a heart attack. He was an entrepreneur, never worked for a large company, didn't know a lot about management, but he built, by the time I got there, an $800 million company. But when I came in, basically they were getting hit very hard by Nike, and of course you know the the Air Jordan shoe was a big factor, and so Reebok was starting to lose share. So that's when they brought me in, and the interesting thing, and we'll talk more a little later about the pump, but I want to talk about the culture. It was really an interesting. It was what I call a tribal chieftain culture. You know,
What's that?
everybody inside of the company, a lot of athletes, weren't so much trying to figure out what the consumer wanted. They were trying to figure out what the tribal chieftain wanted. you know, so there wasn't a lot of independent, think, wait a minute, the ultimate person who's going to determine our destiny is the consumer. So
So,
for me, I brought in a professional outside, consumer products great team. But the biggest challenge there was shifting the culture to a performance culture based on the consumer and how well we were doing with the consumer, not pleasing,
yeah,
the tribal chieftain. So,
exactly.
later yeah, we can talk more about the pump, but
Yeah, what's
and
the
then my
pump?
other, then of course I got fired. So, we had this huge success. The pump did $1 billion in the first year. They had given me a brand new contract. But
Okay.
then Paul Fireman decided he had been, sick. He had been out of the company, decided he wanted to come back in. And he saw it was a very different culture than he was familiar with, and and that's when he terminated me. So probably the other I consider failure was one of the loves of my life, which is I'm an avid motorcycle, and my wife all over the world with groups and
Mm.
whatever, and I went in to turn around, the iconic Indian motorcycle brand, which was older than Harley, but had been, you know,
Okay.
bankrupt for 50 years.
Mhm.
It was bought by Summerfield Johnson, the head of Coca-Cola Bottling Company. He put in 100 million, but unfortunately, he had bought a company that was really a Harley customized manufacturer, not an OEM manufacturer. Anyway, so, I went in, spent 5 years, raised $100 million, brought in a full, great management team and whatever. But we needed $1 billion instead of 100 million.
Yeah.
So it ended up, and now Polaris owns it. But, that was, people say to me, it was probably one of my fondest times and probably one of my biggest failures. So,
You. But in spite of all these failures and everything, I've read about you that you love taking risks and bold risk moves, and you love to
yes.
innovate new products. So, what have you learned about designing a successful, innovative process through all these years that you have been working on these innovations and creative ideas?
Yeah. In the innovative process in almost every company I've gone into, I have, right after getting a good strategic plan,
Mhm.
have really blown up the bureaucracy of product development and, designed a whole new product development process. And I'll have to be honest, I was lucky early in my career to learn a lot of product innovation. When I worked for Mattel, toy companies developed every year have to develop 70% of their products as new products. So I learned a lot about what was called innovation on demand. And MIT had a great guy by the name of Nicholas Negroponte, who ran a thing called the Media Lab, and he had studied innovation. And so we formed a partnership with him. I learned a lot in that about the process of innovation. So what I would do in these cases is go in, uh, set up small pods. The optimum normally for creativity is 5 to 6 people instead of these huge labyrinths of going through all these steps, etc. And then I would put on those teams the design, development, manufacturing, sales, all of the functions that were needed. So there were never going to be handoffs, and we could move a lot faster all the way to the market. The other key to that is totally understanding the consumer. You've got to be a student of the consumer and do consumer research and understand what I call the most critical element, which is called product positioning, which is where in the consumer's mind does your product really exist. So, I'd redesign all the product development process, and I would give a lot of authority to the people. One designer could make all the decisions on a single product, not committees, and the other thing is removing the fear of failure. So I said, the failure is if inactivity, but never penalizing anybody for trying things that didn't work out. So.
That's a wonderful philosophy. But you mentioned about innovation on demand. What's innovation on demand like?
Yeah, it's very interesting when you're in a toy company,
Mhm,
you've got to develop the products for next Christmas, and there's normally up to 3 year development process.
mhm,
You have to have a very disciplined timeline and approach to when everything occurs and all these drop dead dates. You,
okay.
you, you may have heard, but there used to be years ago, there was a thing called PERT that
Mm,
was actually developed by the Air Force in
yeah.
building planes, called Program Evaluation Review Technique. And
Mm,
we use that process. So every product had timelines, exactly who was responsible for what. It flagged if there was any lag in a timeline or a decision, because you couldn't miss. When I first went to Reebok,
mhm,
or when I first went to Mattel, I was in charge of the electronics division. Okay. Now we'll come back to that. The introduction of Intellivision against Atari.
mm,
But also all of the handheld electronic games, they had missed the product cycle on the electronic games. We had no new products one season to introduce,
mm,
which is deadly. So I saw the downside you know, of missing that. But, to your point, you talked about risks. So, if, for example, I'll use, we were introducing the new Intellivision system, a new system that Mattel had developed to go up against Atari. I came in like late October. They had just introduced the system. It wasn't selling. They didn't have the awareness that was required, etc. So, I took a big risk here in doing a, side by side comparison to Atari, where we had very very superior graphics. And that kind of stuff was kind of unknown at that time, in the industry, and in some ways was a big risk. But we were able to break through. So one example. The other one I use is, risk taking and bold moves is when, in the trading card business in Skybox, we had, all the rights to the basketball, league and teams. Um, And that's when I was actually in David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA's office in New York, when he said, Frank, go to your television tonight. And that's when Magic Johnson announced he was HIV positive. And of course, everybody backed away. Nobody knew what to do, etc. I did a quick piece of research with kids and their parents. They saw him as a hero for coming out. And I went to him and I said, I can't afford, and if you knew him, you were a friend of his, you didn't call him Magic, you call him Irving. I said, Irving, I can't afford you, but I'm willing to be the first to go out and promote you, and do commercials with you immediately now, because we really see you as a hero. And he agreed to it. He was phenomenal. He did a commercial with his son, Andre, and he went to all of the trade meetings with me, and it just took our volume and everything through the roof. So that's another example of taking risks.
Wow. But tell me one thing, Frank. You have been known for taking risk. Were you never fearful or afraid, or is it something inbuilt? How would you say this to the people? Because people are always afraid to take risks. They would think it 10 times through. In fact, sometimes we overthink, and because of which we don't land up taking any actions. So, did you never have any fear, or how was it on your end that made you take risks and really take those bold moves, like you said?
Well, I, it's funny. I think I am lucky in that I don't suffer from that. And of course, my wife continues to kid me. Said, Frank, you're the only one that thinks you're not going to get killed by this.
That's a good
She always,
thing.
yeah, oh, yeah, she's the one that's always pulling me off of ledges and things and saying, no, whatever. So I didn't, I think probably, as my friend said, Frank, you failed without question, but you fall forward when you fail.
Wow. So do
and
you like to
and
work? Do you like to work off the cuff? Is that the type of personality you are?
yes, yeah, most definitely, yeah.
Wow.
And,
Okay.
and as other people said, and even a psychiatrist once met with me
Uh-huh.
and who had known me in business and said, you know what, Frank, you do things other people only think about doing, and that is, and of course, the big one there was, of course, and one of them was, of course, the bungee jumping commercial, for the Reebok pump,
Okay.
where, they, as we had two. I went to the advertising agency and, of course, said, I want you to run a campaign none of your clients would ever dare run. That's your assignment, okay?
Uh-huh.
Literally,
Whoa.
because I need something that's bold. We need to get back. We need to get back on the field against Nike. I need something dramatic and not on their turf. They own the basketball court. I don't want to be on that turf. I want to create a new one. And of course, I worked with the San Francisco office. They came up with the bungee jumping commercial. Of course, where there was a Reebok one in jumper and Reebok and one, in Nikes. And when they came back up,
Mhm.
the Nike shoes are empty, and the Reebok eye popped back up.
Yeah.
And when I went to my board and everybody else, my entire management team, they said the PR, my head of PR, I thought was going to faint.
Uh-huh.
She said, Frank, every mother in America is going to call you.
And what happened after that?
And I said, great, that's exactly what we need. And, fortunately, Paul Fireman and they agreed to do it.
Uh-huh.
And as you know, one of the three networks refused to run it. Well, the publicity that created. I couldn't have bought that kind of publicity. Everybody ran to the other two networks to see what it was. It became a massive PR story. Now eventually they pulled the commercial, but that shoe did $1 billion in the first 12 months. So anyway,
That's fantastic. So,
big
so
risk taking.
did your book come from this, like, because of your ability and your personality of, taking risks? And did the book Jump First, Think Fast come out of it?
Yeah, it definitely did. But you know where it came from? And I think 4 years ago,
Mm,
actually on a cruise, I wrote a 250-page outline. Every day I was at a window looking at the ocean, and I wrote a recap of all of the entertaining stories of my career because I thought it's got to be entertaining and interesting. And there were so many interesting stories. And young people would be constantly fascinated by those stories and want more. And that was, I mentored a lot of people. I love mentoring and developing young people
mm,
and people in general. But they were really the one that encouraged me and said, Frank, you got to write a book. So the book, but then I wanted to write something that was different. I read all the book, so many of the book, the self-help books, and how to
mm,
run a successful business and make
yeah.
$1 million before you're 20 and
Mm,
whatever. But, all of them were, here's the steps you need to follow. I said, I'm not going to write that. I'm going to write my experiences. And then you pull from my experiences what really is relevant and inspirational to you. So
mm,
a different
yeah.
approach to, yeah, a business book.
Okay, and so in that book, I know you have written quite a lot of things, like you had mentioned, and I had a little glimpse of it where you've written a lot about taking risks, and you've also shared a couple of your mantras and experiences. So tell us a little bit about your own mantras that you're living by, and some experiences that you've mentioned there.
Okay. The probably one that's most important, my mantra is be fun, have fun.
Be
So
fun,
in
have fun.
all of my businesses, I said, one of the things we're going to do is we are going to have fun here. When I said, I have fun, I live in a humorous world that in some ways is not very serious. And I said, now look, and business is not life threatening. So,
Mm.
you know, so I
We
said,
make it
and the
life-threatening
other
now.
is, yeah. And I said, the other key is I positive. I'm always, always positive. In the case of Skybox, um, I went in to take over this company. I brought in an outside consulting firm. They did an analysis on the company's financial situation, and they came in to me, the head of the consulting firm. A great guy, brilliant. He had an IQ bigger than the room. His name was Cosmo Kaliarakis. Cosmo looked at me and he said, Frank, the company actually lost $40 million last year when we got the accounting straightened out.
Mm.
And I got a great big smile. And he never forgot that. So I said, the whole thing, life is challenges. And what gets me up in the morning is solving problems. So,
My
I
goodness.
was never thrown by, oh my God, what are we going to do? Let's go. Let's put the energy forward, uh, let's go solve it. So that's another one of my big, mantras. My other one, has always been really caring about the development of people. So when you put together a team and you get them to work together and you make it very performance oriented, so they've got to hit the metrics. But in all of my performance reviews, one out of the five objectives always was a personal development objective for you.
Mm.
And when somebody would walk into my office, I'd say, okay, my first objective is you and your development. Then we'll talk about your place in the company, etc. And, that was another one of my, my mantras. So,
Mm. Wow. So when you said that, whenever there has been situations, you always believe in be fun and have fun. And do you practice anything on a daily basis to keep you calm? Because even now, when I'm speaking with you, I mean, your face radiates calmness. So do you do something on a daily basis which our audience and listeners can also practice, or is it something you just feel is natural?
the first thing is, for all of my years, I get up early and I work out for an hour.
You still do that?
And yeah, absolutely. Already, this morning I was up. I was at Planet Fitness.
Wow. So
I worked
what time do you
yeah,
wake up? Like what does early mean
well,
for you?
I always got up at 5:30. That was
Okay.
my normal wake up. Now I get up a little bit later depending on what's going on. But
Mm,
it's always the first thing I do. And my wife, everybody knows, never to disrupt that time. And
mm,
that's also the time when I'm on the bike, I'm very focused. And I'm focused on generally what are my priorities for that day. And I'm a big believer in 5 priorities. First two and last two you can remember, maybe the one in the middle. Prioritize your
mm,
time so that for me, it's always, I've got to feel like I'm accomplishing something.
mm,
So I try to start my days with what I consider to be some place that is most difficult where I need to make a breakthrough or solve a major problem. And also where I'm going to make tough phone calls and going to get rejected. I do that
mm.
first in my day when my energy level,
Okay.
is high.
Mm,
And then, often constantly working on creative ideas and things. And so those keep rolling around, but I have to kind of make progress on them every day. Now, another thing, you will get a kick out of this. Um, when I first went, here I am a farm boy. I go to Cornell. I go to Los Angeles, totally different world. Okay. And I get, of course, exposed to all sorts of interesting things and learn that I'm very interested in mind dynamics, you know, how the mind functions,
mm,
etc. And I, and I get extremely interested also in Indian gurus. And there was one in particular I used to go and see and read his book. His name was Chris Namerte. And the one thing I have taken from that is first is learning how to be quiet and be at peace and go to your levels. Okay. Push everything out and go down to your levels. And then the other was that you can only learn when your mind is quiet. So
mm.
you stop,
Absolutely.
ideas flow in, you shut off. We almost judge everything right, wrong,
Yeah.
you know, stay, be quiet and listen. So, that's probably, those things in the relaxation response technique. And actually I took in California, my whole management team through it, to learn it. And actually, we had set aside during the course of the day 15-minute intervals when we did nothing, no meetings. You could go, you could sit at your desk, or you could go into a conference and and be totally quiet and get focused and relax. So,
And I think as you climb the ladder and as we get into different types of executive roles, this, like you said, understanding the mind dynamics and just having a focus on yourself and being self-aware becomes so important. In fact, I think in one of my books, I had started a chapter with who am I, and how executives must answer this question. So I'm really resonating to what you are saying and how you're making this as a practice. And it's not something that just happens. You wake up in the morning and you decide, I'm going to be calm today in the office. So I like the way you explained that entire process. But Frank, what would be your advice to people who want to succeed, especially these young people to whom you're even mentoring?
Well, you just came right on one of the keys. When I sit down and I meet with somebody, and even if they're early in their career or often in their mid career, I say, have, who are you? Have you done a self assessment?
Mm,
Because I constantly find that so many people are still following somebody else's values or peers
yeah.
or whatever, and not a deep understanding. And I say, what I want you to do is go away, and then I want you to come back and be able in 5 lines tell me what is unique about you as a human being.
Mm,
What is unique about you? And there's something in all of us that is unique. So I said,
absolutely.
understanding yourself. And in fact, it's sometimes even, and I had a son and I actually sent him to, there's a great guy in New York that does works on self-assessment. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? But really get into, who you are. And that's so critical when you come to jobs and fit, into a company as an example. So we actually now in my toy company, we put every candidate through an assessment process to look at fit. So that's number one. The second one is, of course, it's, I find so often it is, getting people, the risk is often breaking those things that you have self-imposed on yourself, whether you realize it or you don't realize, that are holding you back, you
Mm,
know? And so I frequently work with people to try to identify, what is that? And now let's release that. Let's break through that so that you're no longer being, hurting yourself by some self-inflicted behavior or mindset. So, that's the second. And the other is I just say, just now, particularly in this environment, it's that, there's so many great opportunities for jobs,
yeah.
that in some case, go try it, but try to do the right assessment. Is it the right fit for you? But go try it, but reach, but stretch, so.
True. And like you said, it's all about the risk taking. So this is a generation that also needs to try and take in the risk. But Frank, I want to take this ahead our conversation into a leadership rapid fire round. Would you love to do
Okay.
that?
Okay.
Great. So, that is basically where I will ask you something, and whatever answer comes immediately to your mind, that's the one that should be out there.
Okay.
Okay, great, great. So let's go to the first one. The biggest reason for entrepreneurial failures.
It lack of planning,
Lack of planning. Okay.
lack of planning. Yep.
Uh,
Great ideas, but lack of a good plan.
okay, okay. That's nice one. One thing that motivates you to get out of bed in the morning every single day.
Working out
Okay.
and
Different
facing
parts of it.
right. And then it is problem solving, facing challenges.
You mentioned that's something that every single day you are practicing and from years together. So, what is your favorite part of being a leader? You've been leading such huge companies. What's been your favorite part of being a leader?
My favorite, and I learned from day one when I got my first general manager job, I
Mhm.
learned that I loved managing people.
Hmm.
I mean, I love the motivational aspect, the leadership aspect. And, a lot of people, it's tough for them. They find it being a pain and whatever. I
Mm.
never have found that. I have always enjoyed it.
And I think that's when you can be a great leader, is if you really love people, if you love to inspire them and take them ahead of you. And I can so see you have been doing that. I mean, that's a wonderful answer. Which superpower would you choose, Frank? Invisibility or mind reading?
Well, it's all mind reading. And now, you'll
What
get a
would you
kick
do
out
with
of
it?
this is that I'm always trying to, I said, what business are you in? I'm in the business of understanding and predicting consumer behavior.
Mm,
What will people do and how will they respond to things?
mm.
But, all of my friends and my wife kid me, we go to a restaurant and they know I'm studying somebody at the adjoining table. And we just went through that on a cruise. There was one lady sitting alone, beautifully dressed,
Mhm.
alone every night, you know? And I mean, I was so intrigued. So when I got up and I went over to her, I thought my wife was going to faint, because I had to find out. I had to solve this
Oh,
elusive, but I couldn't quite grasp. Anyway, so mind.
did you go to read her mind and see exactly what it is like?
Yeah, and found out what she was doing, why she was alone on the cruise, and whatever. But it was interesting. So
I think that's a wonderful part of being a leader because that's how you get to know more people and really solve the problems that they have. So I
yeah,
think that's such a great quality that you have, Frank. What's been your biggest leadership pet peeve?
my biggest leadership,
Pet peeve.
what? Oh, pet peeve. It is. First it is when anybody kind of says, "Well, let's keep doing what we're doing, but try to do it. Try to do it better." um, and or who keeps trying to solve a problem and has not made progress. So I'm really saying, stop, get out of the situation. Let's stop doing this. Okay. And let's go do something else. Maybe the other one that sometimes drives me a little crazy is, all of the books that are written on now leadership and how to
Mm,
succeed in whatever, when I look at are frequently written by people that may have had one success and
oh
there's a
yeah,
lot to be gained from the book. So I'm not that. It's
I
when I
agree.
see them purely academics writing them as opposed to writing them from real stories about here's what's happened, here's what I've done, and talking about your failures. So anyway,
You're
that's
absolutely right because I see even in my industry in coaching, I see that there are people who have barely had experience anywhere, but they have become coaches, and I feel that yeah, that becomes my pet peeve for some reason. But
sure.
Frank, if you could travel back in time and change one thing about the corporate world, what would that be?
I would switch companies from shareholder ownership to employee ownership.
Oh, that's
Um,
wonderful.
and there is a vehicle called ESOPs, which
Mhm.
are
Yeah.
employee stock ownership, whatever. And
Mhm.
I first experienced it about 8 years ago when I was asked to go on a board of a company in Vermont called King Arthur Flour, now called King Arthur Baking.
Okay.
It's a great company. Anybody who's a baker uses their flour,
Mm,
etc.
yeah.
And they were an ESOP, and I had to learn about it. Is that the employees own the company? Every employee has a share of stock ownership in the company. They elect the board and the management team. So as a board member, you work for them, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And it is such a powerful, the people in that company is always rated number one company in Vermont to work for. They do incredible community oriented things, as well. And you know what is and the way it works is every year an outside firm evaluates the company and puts a price on the stock.
Hmm.
And when you leave, you can only get your stock when you leave. I
Okay.
have watched in the last year people who worked on the floor in
Hmm.
production for 16 years walk off with $1 million.
Wow. Yeah, I think that I have heard of a couple of companies like this. Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do for everyone. That's so good. But
And there's
Frank,
7,000 of them in the US, but yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I've heard. I've heard of some more companies like this where just the last statement that you made that, they have really walked out with millions after they have left. And I think that's a wonderful process, but we don't see it very common. It's not very common in all companies, though. So, wow, I think that's a great one to end this with. But Frank, it's been such an honor to have you here. I mean, I have started to feel that I need mentoring from you. It's to be put like that because you've spoken about so many different dynamics and aspects of business and of your own experiences as a CEO and president. So it has been such an honor to have you here and you sharing your insights for our listeners, Frank.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Great questions. And I've looked at so many of your podcasts. Very valuable information and fun to watch.
Wow, thank you so much. And it's really leaders like you who are making a difference in the world. So thank you so much. And this one's for our listeners. This is Frank O'Connell and Payal Nanjiani signing off, wishing you loads of success. God bless.